This weekend, all across Canada, is Thanksgiving. It's the time of year when families celebrate the greatest meal of the whole year, Thanksgiving dinner. Turkey and ham are usually the meat of choice. The table, stacked with vegetables, potatoes and gravy, drinks, pumpkin pie and ice cream, and the smell in the room and everything necessary for the party spirit. With that in mind, what scripture would you turn to back up what I've just described? Well, here it is. It's one of the best chapters in your Bible. It's the 15th chapter of the book of Luke. Luke is going to tell you three stories. Each of his stories speaks about something lost and something found. One was a lost sheep, one was a lost coin, and one was a lost son. When the story ends, Jesus describes a celebration of a Thanksgiving dinner that you won't forget. The shepherd had lost his sheep, and then he found it. The housewife lost her coin that was very precious to her, and finally she found it, and she celebrated that find by throwing a celebration Thanksgiving dinner for all her friends. The father, he throws a Thanksgiving celebration for his lost son, now found. Three parables, each with a celebration, each with a Thanksgiving story. Let me read them for you, one by one, starting in Luke 15, beginning at verse 3. Here's the first one. Then Jesus told them a parable. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and he loses one. Does he not leave the 99 in the open country to go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. And then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, we're going to celebrate with a meal. Rejoice with me. I have found my lost sheep. Come. Thanksgiving is starting. Three parables, each with a Thanksgiving dinner. In all three stories, the same word appears if you look at it very carefully. Do you know what it is? It's the word happy. Hearing this shepherd's parable, Jesus says, and when he finds it, he happily puts it on his shoulders, and then he goes home. Verse 5 and 6. And when the housewife finds her coin, she shouts, be happy with me, because I have found the coin that I have lost. Verse 9. The father in the prodigal story, he announces to one of his servants of the household, come and celebrate with me and be happy because my son who's been dead is now alive. He was lost and he's now been found. Verse 22. This passage tells me a lot about Jesus. He's happiest when the lost is found. To him, there's no moment that compares to the moment of salvation. In this first parable of the lost sheep, listen to Jesus' words in verse 7. I tell you that in the same way, there's going to be more happiness and joy in heaven over one sinner who repents. I would love to have been a spectator in heaven when he said that, to witness such a party. Verse 10, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God when one sinner changes his heart and his life. Over 150 years ago, there was an English preacher, very famous. His name was Charles Haddon Spurgeon. He preached in London to a large congregation. He said this about this 15th chapter of Luke, describing it to his congregation. There are Thanksgiving days in heaven when Christ speaks to the heavenly angels. Christ is not glorified because he was born in a manger. He's glorified because he was born with a broken heart. There are days when the shepherd brings home the lost sheep upon his shoulder, and when the church has swept her house and found that the lost coin has been found. And then there are friends and neighbors called together, and they rejoice with joy unspeakable and full of glory over the one sinner who repents. When news reaches heaven that the sinner has repented, that causes such excitement. Aren't you curious for the reason why they're so excited? We're not talking about large numbers. They're not celebrating in heaven because our Calgary Flames won the Stanley Cup. And they're not yelling and shouting because our Stampeders won the Grey Cup. Luke here in this chapter says it all happened when one sinner changes his heart and his life. And when a sinner repents, all the other activities in heavens comes to a stop. And all the heavenly beings, they begin to celebrate. Here's the shepherd, 99 of his sheep safely in the fold, but one is missing. The shepherd can't sleep. He leaves his fold and he goes into the field, anxious to find the lamb that had disappeared. He drops everything for the search. And when he finds it, that Thanksgiving party begins. He calls all his pals, and they start to share in the celebration. Here's a second Thanksgiving story in our Luke 15 chapter, beginning at verse 8. Suppose a woman had 10 silver coins, and she loses one. Does she not light the lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I have found my lost coin." In the same way, there's rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over the sinner who repents. This second Thanksgiving story has a wonderful hidden meaning. Jesus uses the finding of the lost coin by the housewife as a stepping stone to something very beautiful in a truth. Here it is. To Jesus, the greatest value in this Thanksgiving dinner is not the meal, and it's not the lost coin. It's you. Why is repenting sinners such value in heaven? Heaven knows how much it costs, that's why. Your salvation was a huge price. Your price tag was Jesus' death on the cross. As Jesus tells these 3 parables, he's actually foretelling his coming death on the cross that is only a few months away. And all the angels in heaven know the price that costs, that pay. In my church in Detroit many years ago when I pastored over there, we had in our congregation a young man back from the Vietnam War. His name was Art. Married. He had 3 kids. He was one of my youth sponsors. One day he said to me, "Ron, I feel called to the ministry. Do you think I could become a pastor like you?" Well, we prayed together, and we thought together, and we planned together, and we put together a whole idea. He could go to our seminary in Sioux Falls on the GI Bill because he was a veteran back from the war. Art accepted the call to become a pastor, and off he went. He moved to the seminary, and he became one of the best students I ever sent there. Before he left, he wanted me to meet his dad. His dad's name was George. He took me to his business. Do you know what his business was? He had a shop down in southeast Detroit near Hamtramck, and it was a Dodge, right beside the Dodge Motor Company assembly plant. Art's dad, he owned a pub, and his clients were motor workers for Dodge Company. Old George was so glad to meet me. He jokingly said to me, "I know who you are, even though I've never met you. You're the reason my son is leaving me with his kids, and they're heading out to Sioux Falls. Is that right?" I said, "Yes, that's probably true." He didn't hold that against me. We began a wonderful relationship. George started attending church. He always sat in the balcony, way up in the corner, hiding from everybody. He was a bit shy, but there he was faithfully every Sunday. One day he told me that he had found the Lord. One night he was sitting listening to Billy Graham, and when Billy Graham gave the invitation, he opened his heart, and he gave his heart to the Lord, and there he became a Christian. Art went to seminary. George made many trips out to see him in Sioux Falls, and they stayed with him. And he told his son Art how much fun he was having coming to our church back in Detroit. Because he had come so faithfully to the church, he was warmly received. He made a lot of friends, and those friends really became close to him. But then, tragedy struck. George lived next to the pub in his house. One night, while he was sound asleep, thieves broke into his house, thinking they could find some money. And they broke into his bedroom, and there they stabbed him to death. George died beside his pub in his personal house. I was asked to witness the release of his body over at the city morgue. I'll never forget that. His funeral service was one of the largest that I'd ever done in our church. Standing room only. Let me tell you the highlight of that service. George had beside his cash register in the pub a register. And it was a bookkeeper's ledger. It had lines and it had pages for names and numbers. The book was full of page after page of names and amounts in red ink. The family gave me the ledger, and they asked me to take it to the pulpit when I did his funeral. And at the tail end of my talk, here's what I was supposed to do. I'll explain, first of all, what the ledger meant. Many of George's clients from the car factory, they would come and sit in the pub, but they'd sit too long, and they would drink up almost their entire paycheck. The client's wife would come to George in the middle of the week, and they would say, "We have no money for food. Could you loan me back some of the money that my husband spent here at your pub?" Well, George began with this ledger to receive all these different housewives whose husbands spent their money foolishly that they should have used for the upkeep of their family. Well, that was George's ledger. And he wrote under each one of them the name of his client, but he also under there the name of his wife. And then over to the right in red ink, he would give the amount that he had loaned them back for them to buy the food. When I concluded my funeral service, I held up that ledger so that everybody could see it, and it was a big ledger. And my job was this. Ladies and gentlemen, many of you know what I have in my hand. This ledger was beside the till in George's pub. You housewives that have come and taken the money back that George gave you for your food back in the house. Some of you have a huge amount. I noticed going down the ledger, some of them are $2,000, some of them are $3,000. Well, I'm here to tell you, on behalf of the family, all these debts have been paid. You don't have to pay anything back. Do you know when I said everything was paid in full? All the debts canceled? When I said that, the whole room erupted. Everyone stood to their feet. Clapping and shouting went on and on. Art's youngest sister became a Christian at the end of that service. Verse 10 of our chapter says, "I tell you," said Jesus, "there is rejoicing in the presence of angels of God over the sinner who repents." Do you know that heaven is a perfect place for people made perfect? Imagine heaven populated with those whom God has changed. George, talk about lost and talk about found. Here was all these housewives that had lost everything, and now suddenly they had found it all back again. One morning, one more Thanksgiving dinner. Verse 11. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger said to his dad, "Give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son, he got together with all that he had and he set off for a far distant country. And there he squandered the wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a famine in the land, and the whole country began to be in need. So he went and he hired himself to a citizen of that country who sent him to the fields to feed pigs. And he longed to fill his stomach with just a few corn cobs that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said to himself, "How many of my father's hired men have food to spare, and here I am starving to death in this far country? Well, I'm going to set out and I'm going to go back to my father, and I'm going to say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me one of your hired men.'" So he got up and he went back to his father. And the Bible says that while he was still a long ways off, his father saw him coming. And filled with compassion for him, he ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Now listen to this last Thanksgiving dinner. Verse 22. But the father said to his servants, Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger, and I want you to put sandals on his feet. He was bare feet. Bring the fatted calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate a Thanksgiving. For this son of mine who was dead is alive again, and he was lost, and now he was found. And they began to celebrate. How's that for a Thanksgiving party? Here's the highlight of the third story that Jesus tells. It's rags to riches. A young man takes his inheritance worth millions of bucks in our money. He goes to the foreign land, and he lives it up and he blows it. He comes home and his father restores him. Let me show you the depth of that restoration. 1. He ran to meet him when he was still a long ways off. What father would do that if his father had been screwed of all that money that he'd given him and lost it? 2, he threw his arms around him and he kissed him. And I think when he did that, the young man probably fell apart. He couldn't believe that his dad still had that much affection for him. 3, the father said to the servant, Bring the robe and put it on him. Do you know what a robe meant in those days if you came from a wealthy family? It showed you your status among the citizens of the country. Put a new robe around him. And he gave him a brand new robe. 4, he put a ring on his finger. Do you know what the ring of the fathers meant? It was a credit card. This young prodigal, he could go down to the livery stable after he received that ring, and he could show it to the owner and buy a brand new horse. That's the restoration that father did for that son. 5, new sandals on his feet. Beggars went barefoot. This young man was never again a beggar. 6 rather. Then comes the Thanksgiving banquet, the fatted calf, and the celebration. Can you now see why the angels in heaven rejoice over one sinner that repents? I got a question for you. How can our hearts be changed so that we can rejoice just like Jesus did? These 3 Thanksgiving dinners point to a world view. It's a wonderful view. You have choices to make. 1, do I go after the lost sheep or just leave them out there and let them die? 2, do I look for the coin or I just forget about it? I'll just leave it. And if I got just the 9, actually that coin is equivalent to a lost diamond ring. 3, am I looking down the road for a prodigal to come home who has beat me up financially and disowned me and made my name to stink in all of Israel? Or pretend he's no longer a member of my family? When the Titanic sank over 100 years ago in the frigid Atlantic Ocean, 2,200 people were cast overboard. Back on the shore, the names of the passengers, they were posted in 2 simple columns: saved or lost. God also has a list, just as simple: saved or lost. I want you this Thanksgiving to ask God to help you have a wonderful eternal view, just like Jesus had. Everybody you meet has been given an invitation to dinner. And when that person says yes, I want you to celebrate with him. Could you do that this Thanksgiving? That's my lesson today. Those are the 3 stories that Jesus told. And because he told the story, heaven erupts. And parties are not only held on earth on a Thanksgiving day, parties are also held in heaven. And the angels are present. And there's God right in their midst. Isn't that a great story? Thanks for coming and listening to it. See you next week.